she had the fortune that her biological mother thought enough to not to leave her on the roadside to die or just leave her by somebody's door. She looked for milk and food for her newborn daughter, even though she and her husband both decided that one more mouth to feed was not worth it. And so they somehow stumbled into these American medical missionaries who adopted my mother. And that's the plight of most Chinese girls on the border because they're not regarded as useful laborers, especially for farmers. And I need to give credits to the Western missionaries, American missionaries, who came in and raised awareness of women's rights and girls' rights, rights to education and to medicine.
Welcome to Linda's Corner, where we bring more hope, healing, and happiness to the world. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about generational trauma. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Richard Perkins-Hsung. Richard was born in China under Mao's Cultural Revolution and came to the U.S. with his mother as a boy, where he eventually became a university professor. He has honored his mother's final wishes by compiling her posthumous memoir, Spring Flower. You can reach Dr. Richard at his website, Yangtze River by the Hudson Bay.site, and I'll include that link in the show notes. Welcome, Richard. I'm so glad that you could join with me today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Linda, for having me.
This is going to be a fantastic conversation because you have an amazing story to tell. Not only your story, but your mother's story. And I have begun reading the beautiful book that you have written, and I'm loving it. It doesn't read like a memoir. It reads almost like a novel, where it is almost historical fiction, only it's not fiction, which makes it even more valuable. And even though I'm not finished, there's so many things to talk about. I'm hoping that China is changed from when your mother was a baby, because one of the very first things that came up was the Chinese cultural, what should we say, view of women. So can you kind of explain what happened when your mom was born and how she was valued because she was a girl?
Uh, so, yes, no, she was not valued. Uh, and pretty much that was true for the entire country, especially for the populations that are toiled in poverty. So she was born on a dirt floor from a dirt poor family, a farmer's family, and but again, out of all her unfortunateness, she had the fortune that her biological mother thought enough to not to leave her on the roadside to die, or just leave her by somebody's door. She looked for milk and food for her newborn daughter, even though she and her husband both decided that one more mouth to feed was not worth it. And so they somehow stumbled into these American medical missionaries who adopted my mother. And that's the plight of most Chinese girls on the border because they're not regarded as useful laborers, especially for farmers. And I need to give credits to missionaries, Western missionaries, American missionaries, who came in and raised awareness of women's rights and girls' rights, rights to education and to medicine. Right.
Thank you. And it matters that we see another way because however we are raised, however we grew up, that is our baseline. That is normal. That is truth. That is the way it is. And until someone else shows us that there is another way, we don't even realize that there's a choice. And that is frustrating. And it leads to that generational cyclical problems because we don't even know that we can change. I also thought it was fascinating, I'm sorry, just in the culture, that your grandmother's feet were bound, that was that recent. And would you mind, there may be people who are listening who don't even know what that means. Could you kind of just briefly explain what that is?
Well, it was a form of beauty uh, in men's eyes in a male-dominant society, but at the expense of a woman. I would say torturing. It would be a more befitting word. And basically, they were bound when they were very young girls, and then ultimately when they grow up with deformed feet, even though they can balance themselves, essentially on two wood stumps, right? That's what my mother was using, I guess, the phrase. And even though they become very nimble walking on those stumps, but it was total, yeah, mistreatment of
Yeah,
women. Yeah.
absolutely. So what was considered beautiful was to have teeny tiny little feet. And so
Yes.
in order to have the appearance of these beautiful, to some people, teeny tiny feet, is to crush and to break those bones and to try to mold feet into teeny tiny little things that turned into misshapen, something like wooden stumps.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
um, that was considered a form of beauty. And so as your grandmother was trying to carry your mother to find food and to be able to find these missionaries and say, hey, I can't take care of this child, but maybe you could. She was doing all of that walking and all of that traveling on deformed, painful, teeny tiny feet.
right. Shortly after she gave birth, also, and actually, she was already back on the farm on the rice paddies and doing the farm work. Um, To give my mother's biological mother credits, she was a tough woman, obviously, right? So, yeah, she was walking on those stumps all over the place looking for food for my mother and maybe looking for a taker, a family that would take these young girls in the name of as a future daughter-in-laws, but technically it was just a female servant until they come of age. Maybe they can uh, be a machine for for having a few more grandsons, right? So that's how they regarded women and girls.
Yeah, I found that fascinating. That was a piece of the story that I was not aware of. That from the time a girl is a couple months old, you want to get rid of them. You want to make sure that they found a future mother-in-law, someone who would take them as a servant, as a slave, so that they would be able to have a future. And that picture it just breaks my heart and it hurts my head. It's painful to even learn that that kind of unfairness exists in the world anywhere. So thank you for bringing it to our attention. I did not enjoy it. And yet I feel like, wow, that was important to know. So thank
But
you.
you know, Linda, that mindset continues to today, even in America, in the Western world, right? Come to think of it, it was Western missionaries who were trying to tell Chinese people that you can't treat women and girls this way. But then back home meaning America, here for me, that we do a lot of yeah. There were plenty of inequalities that persist in terms of
Absolutely.
gender. Yeah.
Right. And we have to be aware of it and we have to recognize that there is another way before we are able to change. Okay, so your sweet mom, who started this world with such a rough start, and in addition to all of the cultural situations which everyone faced, there was even more because there was a great flood. The Yangtze River flooded. And when we talk about flooding, I appreciate that you put in there what that meant. Because to me, flooding, yeah, it went a little bit, but it went from, what was it, 1.5 miles wide normal.
Yeah.
But
Right.
during this flood, it went
Uh,
to 30,
yeah.
30, and
Right.
in some places 120, which
Right.
means you might think you are well away from the river,
Mm,
and yet your home is destroyed, your
mm,
farm is destroyed,
yeah.
you have no food, you have no home, you have nothing. So just a time of economic depression, of just, I mean, the really a lot was stacked against her. And
Well,
even more reason for your grandparents, her parents, to just get rid of this one. We can't do anything with that one.
completely. So, I mean, you can come to their defense in some ways. And again, I was saying, giving my mother's biological mother credits, right? She was looking for a taker, looking for food for her, milk for her. And that was one of the worst natural disasters in the 20th century. They counted it killing upwards of 4 million people from drowning, starvation, and of course, infectious diseases thereafter, and also, again, famines, right? So it's to the point where a lot of Americans I should try to come in to the rescue. I'm not talking about missionaries per se, but just Americans and including a famous name like Charles Lindbergh will fly his own plane to carry supplies to help out Chinese people in dire strait. So,
Oh
and my
my.
mother miraculously lived. Yeah.
It is. It is a miracle that she lived. So we've kind of set the stage just a little bit about the culture and about her biological parents, which lived in one world, one culture. And now, can you tell us about her adoptive parents? And now this child is in kind of another world, even if she's living in the same country.
Yeah. So, just I guess she was probably too young to be aware, but I mean, for a reader, for me, looking at her life, it just be blown away, right? So she was then surrounded by Westerners, English-speaking people, and of course, my American grandparents, right? And she lived an idyllic childhood, right? Just very happy childhood, and a totally different life from what it could have been, right? And my American grandparents had been there for about a decade and a half or a couple decades and used their own funds to build hospitals and schools. And essentially, in a town directly across from the small village where my mother was born. So they were setting up refugee camps for all these flood refugees, and that's how they actually met my mother's biological mother, and that's how the adoption took place. Yes.
Wow, I am so grateful for them. They sound like just amazing people who genuinely wanted to make a difference. And in the case
Yeah.
of your
Uh,
mother, they made all the difference.
Yes, I mean, my American grandfather was born and raised in Hartford from one of the bluest blood New England family that you can find, powerful, wealthy, and he was searching for meaning of life. And he ended up in a rural fishing village in China, in central Yangtze River Valley, they call it, right? So it's south central China. And then, and with his wife, who was Scottish and born and raised in Edinburgh, and two of them together spent almost 4 decades just essentially dedicating their lives to Chinese people, period. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That is amazing. Okay. And did she ever keep in touch with her biological parents at all, or was that just moving forward?
On and off, here and there. And they obviously visited her numerous times. And then from my mother's recollection, or even from my mother reading her American mother's letters, they were there looking for help, food, money, and resources. Not necessary to see how she was doing per se, but little bit of that also, right? And then they lost touch with one another sometime in the 1950s and 60s. I know my mother still has relatives back in that town, even today. I don't know who they are, but
Wow. Okay. Well, let's move forward about World War II. And can you tell some more of the story? Because, if we just stopped right there, we could just sound like, wow, that was rough and everything turned out awesome. But there's a whole lot more story in there that was not awesome.
right. So then the Japanese swept through much of southern part of China. They were already occupying northeastern territory in China. And then, but they had not declared war with England and America yet. So my American grandparents were allowed to stay, keep the hospital open and functional. And also, as long as you erect an American or British flag or paint everywhere with the Red Cross, Japanese armies, imperial armies will leave you alone most of the time. And so my mother was sheltered in some ways, but she still had to go to school. So she experienced a lot of situations where she recognized that, you know, this is, their country had been her country had been invaded, and there are second, third, fourth class citizens, and Japanese soldiers can do whatever they wanted to as long as they wanted to. So, but my grandparents' hospital ground became a haven for many Chinese people trying to hide from the Japanese soldiers and so on. So, but they were there, and until, of course, Pearl Harbor, America was at war with Japan. And so my mother actually left China with her parents and spent 3 years living in Yonkers, New York.
I bet that was a bit of a culture shock. How does she describe that?
She was blown away, ecstatic, right? Because even though she was surrounded by English-speaking school, English-speaking people, and she attended English-speaking school, but she was still like what you were mentioning earlier, alluded to earlier. She was still in impoverished China. America was just glittering, right? And especially Manhattan, New York. And so, I mean, how many countries at that time had Empire State Building? I mean, even though America just came out of the Great Depression, but still, right? This is just otherworldly, and uh, but she adapted very well because she had her, uh, she spoke pretty good English, and she had her American parents. So.
I'm glad. And you said she was only there for 3 years. What happened next?
Well, as I was saying earlier, that my American grandparents, many people regard them as Chinese in their previous lifetime. They just want to go back to China to be with Chinese people and help them. So, literally on VE Day, my mother found herself on a battleship en route to Africa. And my grandparents took her out of school, trying to get back in China from the western border, from Burma, because hadn't surrendered yet. This will be May 8th, 1945. So they ended up in India, and then the American missionaries in India says you can't go back in there; they're still at war. So they end up spending about a year in India. My mother actually attended a British boarding schools in the Himalayas. So that was another very interesting experience for her. Was only what, 16 or 17, and she had traveled around the world.
Wow. And you mentioned that she ran into Gandhi. What was her experience with him? I mean, how many people get to meet Gandhi?
Yeah, so I think Gandhi was on one of his passive hunger strikes. And I guess it was my American grandfather who knew about the story and tried to explain to my mother as Gandhi was being surrounded by a group of people. And this was shortly before independence, India's independence from British colonization. So yeah, so she wondered about that, and she wondered what the purpose and the goal would be to achieve what through such a self-sacrifice, right? So, but she was probably too young to know the gravity of the situation.
Gosh, she was so young. Boy, I mean, she's just living through so much history that we read about in stories, and she was there. They're in person. They're
Right.
experiencing this. They're experiencing this. Being in China at a time when feet were still bound, when women are treated as less than fish guts, less than dirt, and then being there when we have the river flooding, and being there when China is invaded by Japan, and being there and being greatly affected by Pearl Harbor and having to move, and then spending time in India where she meets Gandhi, who is about to change his whole section of the world. And it's just like, you're just a kid. You're just a kid.
Yeah.
You're just living your life, and all this stuff is happening all around that you are witnessing and a part of. And I mean, you're just a kid living your life.
Yeah. And then some people had made the comment, and I also pointed out too, that the first half of her life or memoir of the book reminds people of Forrest Gump, right? Just inadvertently stumbling into these historical moments, right? It's almost like it was set up for him or for her, right?
Right. Oh, wow. Okay. So eventually they do make it back to China, but at some point they get separated and she gets trapped in China and she's stuck there. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about that? And you were born in China
Right.
under Mao. So
Right.
some more big changes are about to take place.
Yeah. So they weren't aware. I mean, they knew about communism, right? And they actually experienced firsthand of some of the infighting between at the time the National Republic Nationalists, the government now is in Taiwan, of course, and fighting with the communist armies during the early parts of the 20th century, right? So this will be the late 1940s after World War II. So, but the Civil War broke out soon after they got back into town, into the village that they were pursuing their medical mission. And then 3 years later, the Communist Army swept through the entire China, took over, and lo and behold, they were very organized and orderly and polite. And they actually asked my grandparents to stay to keep the hospital functional. But I guess it makes sense, right? Because it doesn't matter what revolution it is, everyone needs a good doctor. My grandfather was a highly skilled surgeon, right? So then, but it didn't last long, the good days. So they stayed, right? So and my mother was a freshman off 300 miles away in an English speaking college, and soon after that, Korean War began, which is the war that preceded the Cold War and was a proxy war between America and China and Korean Peninsula. So my American grandparents had to flee. They were essentially driven out with other remaining missionaries overnight, and my mother could make it back and to leave with them. And so she was trapped, left behind in China, and later on became 3 decades trapped in China.
3 decades trapped in China. And she did her best to move forward. I know she got married. Um, and wasn't her husband, your father, wasn't he imprisoned? What was the story with that?
Yeah, so I say trapped. I probably should qualify because people say, well, she's Chinese, right? Well, she was trapped because she looked Chinese, but she was raised by Westerners, and English was essentially her first language. She had very little knowledge about Chinese history and culture. She spoke Chinese with American accent. And so, but she was resilient and she was brave and courageous, even though she was just 19-year old. Right? So, and she realized maybe the one way to survive is A, to speak better Chinese, uh, B, is to find a local. So my father, of course, was born and raised in China, and they kind of knew each other from college days. And so she married him, and he was extremely helpful for her survival in China, essentially as a foreigner in her own birth country. Right? And my father became a very well-known agronomist, world-renowned. He was among the earliest generation to look into crossbreeding, hybrids, and genetic engineering, of course. And so he criticized some of the economic policies Chinese government had in 1950s. So by the time Mao's Cultural Revolution began, he was on the he was among the first wave to be imprisoned, sent to a labor camp. And he was even on execution list briefly. And so, yeah, so then my mother ended up had to raise me and my older sister essentially on her own for a good part of a decade.
Was your father, did he make it out?
He was at a labor camp, Stalinist gulag, for about the 4 or 5 years. My father couldn't recall exactly he was officially released, but even after he was released, so-called being on parole, he was asked to do these mindless work, right? So he was already before he went to the labor camp. He was a director of a very well-known national research institute. He was already a full professor at the age of what 30. So yeah, so the Cultural Revolution, of course, is a revolution that completely decimated all the creative, highly educated people in China. So, right. So by the time he came out, I was probably 4 or 5 years old. I didn't know who he was. And I called him sir for the longest time before I recognized he was actually my father.
So if he was in the gulag for 4 to 5 years and you were 4 to 5 years old, he must have been taken either before you were born or shortly after.
So the Cultural Revolution began, I think I was already about 6 to 8 months old. My birth date is actually pretty fishy. So doesn't matter how they count how they counted my age. But point is, I was not quite 1 year old, and then he was taken away. By the time he came out, I think I was about 4 or 5. So he was in the labor camp about 4 or 5 years.
And you were a teenager when you were able to make it to the United States. So did he come with you? Was he still around?
No. So, in essence, the relationship between my father and me is non-existent, right? By the time he came around, we were trying to build a relationship. Then we were pretty much preparing on our way out, or my mother was preparing on her way, fleeing China, so to speak. And then one way we can get out of China for my mother to return to America, which she called home, would be to leave my older sister and my father behind, essentially splitting the family in halves. Yeah. And so my father did not immigrate until late 1990s, and my sister and her son didn't come out till 2003. So it's a quarter century later. And so, yeah, that was what happened.
That would be so hard as a mom to leave your child behind. I just, wow.
I think it was excruciatingly painful for her, but I never noticed. I never knew because she wouldn't tell me. And yet it was extremely painful for me because I didn't want to leave, right? It was like when she was 16 years old and her parents uplifted her from a junior high in Yonkers and then they came back to China. She didn't want to do that. And at that time, China was improving. I didn't want to leave China. I have friends. I was in a junior high classroom too when my mother literally shanghaied me onto a Pan Am flight. And next thing I knew, my mother was coaching me about her past, her life. And then we landed in JFK, and then my life was altered forever.
Yes,
And
it
then
was.
my sister and my father then were left behind, so to speak. Right.
Wow. Okay. So now you're at JFK. How did that go?
Not very well. I didn't know a word of English. And so it became a whole new set of struggles that I was completely unprepared for. And I had to abandon all the things I thought I would be doing if I had lived in China or continued living in China.
My goodness.
I did not appreciate my mother bringing me out at the time. But of course, you know, it's been 45 years almost, half a century almost, right?
Okay. Wow. So that makes sense that there'd be a lot of resentment. Like you just destroyed my world. You just destroyed our family.
Yeah.
What are you thinking?
But now I understand, right? Because it's just like any migrants, I mean, who would be crazy enough to leave their motherland, abandon their mother language, mother tongue behind if they're not fleeing something, man-made disasters or natural disasters? So everyone decides to do that because they were oppressed. They were living under oppressed situation. I know, I mean, I understand, I appreciate my mother bringing me out here to America. A very different life.
I'm glad that in the end that it feels like, that choice was good, not only for her, but also for me, because you didn't make the choice.
No, the choice was never mine. uh, but yes, but now I am, especially compiling this memoir, looking back on many things that took place in China, many things that took place in her life. So I'm very grateful I have a good life in America.
I imagine that putting together her story has been very healing for you. It's like, oh, that's why.
And yes, healing and redemptive, um, and also realizing that I'm trying to, and now I'm still, of course, I'm still on this journey now, trying to find out who I am because I'm neither, right? I'm not Chinese. No one regarded me as Chinese when I visited China. And I'm also not American. I could be regarded as first and a half generation, but I'm not, right? So it's this third, they call it third culture or biculture, and also struggling with language. I had to relearn Chinese because I stopped speaking Chinese. And of course, I'm struggling with English all my life, right? So even today, yeah. So it's very interesting that way. But yet, learning to accept what it is, learning to accept as it is, and be proud of what I have. And I think that was very redemptive for me. Mhm.
I'm glad. And I think we're all trying to figure out who we are. And we attach ourselves to a country, a culture, a something to say that's who I am. And yet it really isn't. That's our experience. We are, we're human, we're people, we're children of God. We are more the same than we are different. Even if our country is different, even if our culture is different, as horrible as it might be to feel displaced, if it helps you become aware that you are more than a country, you are more than a culture, I think in the end, you might have a leg up on someone who's satisfied with an identity of a country or a culture.
Right. I'm not there yet, but I'm aware of it now. And much more so than say 10, 20 years ago, when I was younger. And so I don't resent that, and I also I'm grateful for the opportunity for this recognition. And even though it might be a bit of a struggle going forward, it'd be exciting too, right? As opposed to, but at one point in time, and I still do believe that if you have an opportunity to live your life in one place, being accepted by people who surround you, by the community you're in, it's very fortunate, even though not everyone has that fortune. Um, but if you have the opportunity, why not? I mean, at one point in time, I would have preferred to have lived a life like that. And uh, but this will be like as it is. It's a completely different journey and completely different set of struggles. And with my mother's memoir, having completed and having helped her completing it, I think I'm glad that I can now have time to look at this problem and look at this issue going forward.
Right. And we can't solve any problem that we don't know exists, right?
Exactly.
We
I
have to
can
be
put it that
aware.
way.
It's like, you
Yes.
know what? This is still a part of me. And this is something that I need to heal from. And then you can. But you really can't until you're aware that
You
it is a
accept.
problem.
Yes. You
Mhm.
identify and accept, and that's the beginning of the journey. So, right.
Wow, this has been amazing. Richard, thank you for visiting with me. Thank you for sharing some of your story and some of your mother's story. I recommend the book. I think this is amazing. And I thought you're equating it to Forrest Gump is kind of accurate, where it's like there's a lot of history in there. There's a lot that just flows through. So thank you. Is there anything else you want to make sure that we cover before we close today?
Oh, not really. Just I think the really the impetus for writing this book for my mother and later on also for me was not necessarily just about her life. She just a witness. It's about history, of course, but it's really to honor all the people that she had the fortune of encountering, starting from her adopted American grandparents, or even her own biological parents who did not leave her on the roadside to die. And all the way through those 30 years, tumultuous decades in China, if it weren't for these wonderful people that she called angels out of woodwork, uh, I wouldn't be sitting here. She wouldn't be able to come back to America. So this memoir is really to honor all these people.
It's beautiful. Thank you for honoring all of those people.
Thank you.
In closing, I'd like to share a quote by Muhammad Hassan. He said, "The journey may be long and the road rough, but every step forward is a step toward a dream fulfilled." Today, I invite our listeners to courageously continue their own journey toward a dream fulfilled. See you next time on Linda's Corner. Thanks for tuning in to Linda's Corner podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends to help us inspire even more listeners. Be sure to visit hopeforhealingfoundation.org for free and affordable resources to help you overcome life's challenges. And explore healingbreathworkdetox.com, where you'll find transformative tools for deep inner healing and lasting change. Also, don't forget to check out my books, Crushed, A Journey Through Depression, and You Got This, an action plan to calm fear, anxiety, worry, and stress. Your journey to hope, healing, and happiness starts here.